and 1. Welcome, and thank you for joining me for Advocacy Action Steps as part of the Dyslexic Edge Conference, Tackling 2020 Together. My name is Lorraine Hightower. I'm a certified dyslexia advocate and consultant who works in multiple counties in Virginia, helping parents of students with dyslexia work collaboratively with their school teams to ensure that their students have the supports and services that they need, not just to access the curriculum, but to thrive in school. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to wear a variety of hats and be a part of important conversations with parents, teachers, administrators, and even legislators. I've been pleased to be a part of systemic change locally and across the state of Virginia. But as we find ourselves here in 2020, we've never been in a situation like this before. My advocacy journey first began with my son over 10 years ago when he was in elementary school, and teachers who had 30 years experience explained to me that while my son was very bright and very capable, he was struggling to learn basic academic skills like reading and spelling and writing and memorizing his math facts. I'll never forget that sinking feeling that I had at my parent-teacher conference when they explained to me that my son was just below the statewide literacy screener, or that he was a fluid reader, even though he skipped words, he was able to comprehend the text, or that his spelling was a little bit more phonetic than it should be at his developmental age. Unfortunately, parents right now in this distance learning environment are hearing these same things. And while all of us are experiencing growing pains because we have never been faced with the educational challenges that we are faced with today, there still is important conversations that need to be had about students who are suspected of having disabilities, students who have IEPs, whose services may be reduced due to distance learning, and parents who feel that they really don't have any advocacy options because distance learning has been placed on their student. Unfortunately, our kids also feel that they have been somewhat punished by being put in a virtual environment where they are having to sit in front of computer screens all day, that they're being denied the opportunity to go to school and be a part of a community, and they miss seeing their teachers in the classroom and learning live. Also, as a part of this unprecedented time, there are some, what I'm calling COVID-19 myths that we must address as we move into some of the specific advocacy steps that I believe you as parents should take. First, one of the myths that I hear almost daily when I talk with parents is that because of distance learning, schools are reducing services for students with dyslexia who have IEPs. Parents say to me, is this okay? Is this something that we should agree to? And I want to set the record straight that just because we are in a virtual distance learning environment doesn't mean that your child's special education services need to be reduced, regardless of what is happening for the general education student as part of their instructional day. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you might do if you see this happening for your child and you have concerns you want to talk about with the school team. Also, another COVID-19 myth that parents are talking about on social media and calling and asking me about is, are schools going to provide recovery and compensatory services? Again, we'll get into what do these terms mean, but services that are provided to help students recover some of the skills that have been lost since schools have been closed are being discussed by IEP school teams. In fact, the Virginia Department of Education recently produced a document called COVID-19 Recovery Services to provide local school teams with guidance for how these conversations and decisions should be made. Another myth that again has parents confused about what they could advocate for to support their students is assistive technology. Many parents are scrambling to try to provide their kids with assistive technology at home and make sure that they have all the tools they need to access the curriculum and show what they know. But these are IEP team decisions. And if your child's IEP team has determined that your child needs a dedicated laptop or an iPad or audiobooks or speech to text, then the school team has an obligation to help you as parents ensure that your child has all of those important tools. And another COVID-19 myth, if you will, is that just like in the fourth quarter, schools are going to be using a lenient grading system, or that there will not be statewide assessments. And all of the guidance that has come from the Federal Department of Education and the US Department of Education indicates that this is a very different school year. As many parents are finding out, schools are taking attendance, they are teaching new content, and they will be assessing your child. And that's why it's critical that our kids who learn differently have the supports and services that they need to not just access the curriculum, but to show what they know. And the good news is that nothing has changed. Even though it feels like everything has changed because of the medical pandemic that we're all finding ourselves in, and businesses being closed and kids learning from home, the good news is that according to the US Department of Education, our students with disabilities are still entitled to a free and appropriate public education. In fact, even when schools closed in Virginia due to the governor's order on March 13th, the requirement of FAPE never changed. There were no waivers granted, it didn't disappear, it wasn't put on hold. So if you are a parent who has a student with an IEP, an individualized education program, or a 504 plan for accommodations, those privileges, if you will, of being a student with disabilities have always been in place. And more importantly, these plans must be individualized and they must be appropriate for your child regardless of their placement, meaning whether they learn at home or at school or in some type of a hybrid learning environment. So now I'd like to move into some advocacy action steps that I believe will help you as parents of students who have disabilities apply to your everyday life right now as you try to figure out how can you effectively advocate for your child. Number one, well, many parents don't like when I suggest to them that you must reconvene the school team because they would like to take more immediate action and they don't want to wait for a meeting. And sometimes these meetings can be difficult and filled with a lot of emotion. In order to affect change for your child, it is critical that you reconvene the school team. And I'm going to say that reconvene the school team at whatever stage you are in. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're a parent who doesn't know if your child has a disability. Then you need to be reaching out to your school and saying, I suspect that, over the course of the last 5 months, I now have new concerns about my child. They may have disabilities. And how do I go about requesting an evaluation to determine if they should have important supports and services in school? Or if your child has an IEP, an individualized education program, and you haven't had the opportunity to reconvene with your child's school team, it's critical that you bring everyone back to the table right now to discuss any new challenges, new concerns, new accommodations in this distance learning environment that you believe your child needs. And as we said, although 504 plans have different regulations and school teams aren't required to meet with parents as part of a 504 plan, you too can reach out to your school's 504 coordinator if you believe your child needs additional accommodations in this new learning environment. And as part of these conversations, it is vitally important that as parents, you talk about the data and that school teams use the data to make informed decisions for your child. Data comes from a variety of sources. Teachers can provide data, private clinicians can provide data, parents have data, and all decisions should be made on data. However, whenever I say this to parents, they say, well, what kind of data are we supposed to provide as parents? And parents have the opportunity, as really acting as their child's teacher since March, to talk about what is working, what is not working. Parents can audio record their child reading. If they took an audio recording from March, they can take an audio recording now and share that with the IEP team and talk about the differences. Or if you haven't done that and you feel like you'd like to, take a video now, that's perfectly acceptable. You can even have a spiral notebook that talks about, my child was able to attend in the distance learning environment on these days and for this long, or they're not able to attend in this learning platform. But once again, if you don't have the data, you need to request this of your IEP team. There's anecdotal data that teachers can provide. There's diagnostic assessments that can be given. And right now, schools across Virginia are giving many benchmark assessments as well as diagnostic assessments to determine the unique needs of students with disabilities. In fact, the Virginia Department of Education, in that COVID-19 resource document, they actually spend a good amount of time talking about the importance of parent data. And that because parents have been watching, acting, supporting their kids, just like a classroom teacher would be doing, that their data is critical to the decision-making process. As part of these school meetings, it's also really important that parents stay open-minded and solution-focused. Again, as we said, many parents reached out to me because they were being asked to attend school meetings to talk about amendments due to the change of placement for their kids. Students who were learning in a public day school will now learning at home. And some parents were moving their child to a homeschool environment or a private school. All of these decisions can happen as part of a school meeting, and cutting services does not need to be the focus of that discussion. So I really do encourage parents to bring their own ideas, their own creative solutions, as well as be willing to listen to what the school team is proposing, even if it is different from what you had in place when you were back in the traditional school setting. Second, I recommend that parents invite others to the conversation if they feel that they're not being heard or that they're not able to articulate the solution that they feel would benefit their child. In all of the school districts, whether it's asking for additional teachers, content specialists in the areas of English or math or written expression, special education supervisors can come to school meetings and offer their perspective on what could be done to better support your child. Assistive technology experts or occupational therapists, all of these critical team members exist in every school district. And parents have the right to request that certain participants come and join the discussion about their child and their unique needs. Oftentimes, it is critical that you have decision makers at the table who have the authority to talk about changing your child's school services and accommodations, and especially in the area of recovery or compensatory services. So if you anticipate that you will need to have these important discussions, then request prior to your child's school meeting that others who are available to join in and offer their creative solutions come to the table with you. Number 3, consider obtaining additional data. I just talked a little bit about how critically important parent data is, but I also realize that you may not have that information. So if you don't and you reconvene your school team, now is the time to request it. Talk with your school team about what baseline data they have for all of your child's areas of concern. If they don't have the data that you can look at and make informed decisions, then request it. Talk about how they might get a reading fluency measure, or in the case of students with dyslexia, we want to have assessments that speak to their decoding ability, their encoding or spelling ability, their ability to write sentences and translate all of their decoding and encoding skills into connected text. These are not difficult assessments to administer, and teams are able to create these assessments and share them with parents and use them to guide decisions around services. Of course, if your child is working with a private tutor or a school teacher in a more restrictive environment, then you want data from those individuals as well. If your child just started working with a tutor, they often will give a pre and post assessment for each lesson. Classroom teachers also, even though we've only been in school for a couple of weeks, are assessing students to see what do they know and are they, following along with these lessons, or does reteaching or pre-teaching need to take place? And they can speak to the unique needs of your child. Number 4 is consider recovery and compensatory services. Parents say to me all the time, what are these terms, recovery and compensatory services, and how come I haven't heard about them before? Well, COVID-19, as we said, has placed us all in a whole new learning and educational environment. And because schools were closed back in March as part of a governor's order, school teams were just offering continuity of education activities, but no real learning or teaching was taking place because schools were closed. And over the summer, unless parents were providing it, students were without the benefit of any type of instruction. And now as we sit down and we look at their baseline data, in some cases, students have actually regressed and failed to make progress towards their IEP goals. In those cases, it is really critical that school teams talk about recovery services. And I do want to add that recovery services are provided to students who do have an IEP, an individualized education program. So if your child has a 504 or they haven't been found eligible for special education services, recovery services are not part of those school meeting discussions. But if they do have an IEP and they were not able to have special education instruction and they are failing to make progress and potentially are even farther behind in key academic areas prior to March 13th when most of our schools closed, then determining recovery services for your student could be a very important decision. Compensatory education has to do with when a school team has not provided your child with a free and appropriate public education. And this looks different than recovery services. In recovery, it's not necessarily any harm that was caused by a school team. It's more situational. A pandemic happened, schools were closed, a child was denied instruction, and therefore they're not able to make meaningful progress towards their IEP goals. Compensatory education is more of a remedy when a school team has not provided a child with a free and appropriate public education, which often involves special education services. So these are very different, and in some cases, children might be candidates for both. So these are important discussions to have with your IEP team, and all of these decisions will be based on present level data, and as we say, what harm was done or what progress has not been made. I do want to add that if your child did have private support over the summer, whether it was through you or a private tutor, or maybe it was a camp that you sent them to, and they did actually make progress or they were able to maintain their skills in all areas that their IEP supports them in, then most likely they're not a great candidate for recovery or compensatory services because no harm has been done and they haven't lost progress. I also want to encourage you as parents to really understand your procedural safeguards. So many parents say to me, well, what are my procedural safeguards and how do I learn about them? And at most IEP meetings, if you've had the chance to attend those, parents are provided with a packet of information that's kind of slid across the table, and oftentimes they don't take it or they refuse to read it, or all of us get busy and we simply don't have time, or it's emailed to you as part of a meeting invitation to come to your child's IEP meeting. But that packet of information or that link is actually a really important document that parents should take the time to review, because in the state of Virginia, there are regulations that talk about how school teams and parents should work together and what are the rights of parents who are advocating for their students who do learn differently. And I'd like to highlight a couple of the important ones that you can implement today as you're trying to advocate for your child. First and foremost is consent. And by this, I'm talking about parent consent. Whenever a school district would like to initiate, start, stop, or change services for students who have disabilities, in Virginia, they are required to get consent of the parent prior to doing so. And this begins at the very beginning of the special education journey when parents request an evaluation. In order to give an evaluation to a student, they must have agreement that the parent is willing for that student to be evaluated. And then from there, if that child is found eligible for special education services, parents play an important part of the conversation and ultimately give consent to what services and accommodations are implemented for their child. For my families that I work with who have 504 plans, I do want to mention that 504 plans fall under different regulations than individualized education programs. And while school teams in Northern Virginia are often very welcoming to parents and include them in 504 plan discussions, there is no parent consent requirement for 504 plans. Parents also, as part of their procedural safeguards, have the right to request an independent education evaluation if they do disagree with the findings of the school's evaluation. And many parents are surprised to hear this, and they didn't know that this was an option. So if your child has been evaluated by your school team and you disagree with the findings for any reason, it is appropriate and recommended that you ask the school for an independent educational evaluation. And that gives the parent an opportunity to take their child to whichever private provider meets the criteria that the school has said must be met in order for a private evaluator to conduct an evaluation, and give you the chance to learn more about your child's strengths, weaknesses, unique needs, how the private evaluator recommends that they should be supported in the school environment. And this information must be considered by your school team. Often an independent educational evaluation is provided at the expense of the school district. In some cases, depending upon who the parent selects to conduct the evaluation, there might be an additional cost if the private evaluator chooses to do an even deeper, more comprehensive evaluation than the amount that the school district allots for independent educational evaluations, or IEEs. But I do encourage you as parents to learn more about this option, because the more data you have about your child, the better informed your child's IEP team or school team decisions will be. Prior written notice is also another important procedural safeguards that I'm surprised parents are not aware of. And I would encourage you again to become comfortable talking about prior written notice with your child's IEP team. Prior written notice is a document that the school creates and is a great way to track decision making. Sometimes it's called PWN. And what a PWN, or prior written notice, is that whenever a school team, as we said, proposes to start, stop, or change anything that has to do with your child's special education services or supports, they are required by the state regulations to document those changes or those suggestions. And they're also not just required to document these proposals, but to provide the data that supports their proposed change, and also the discussion that took place, other factors that were considered, and it also tracks when parents ask for a request or a change or additional services. So parents say to me, let me get this straight. If I think my child needs additional services, the school team disagrees, that's not the end of the conversation. And it really isn't the end of the conversation, because as a part of putting together a prior written notice document, school teams are supposed to look at the data, consider other options, hear parent suggestions, and if they do refuse, track why they refuse, why they believe that that suggestion or that request is not warranted at this time, and use data and rationale to support their decision making. So if you're not familiar with prior written notice, or you haven't been receiving this document after your school IEP meetings, then you want to start requesting it. And if you do have suggestions or request of your school team, and there is refusal at the IEP team table about your request, then please ask your IEP team to document your request in the prior written notice document, so you have record of why your parent request was refused. Another important procedural safeguard is audio recording of eligibility in IEP school meetings. As parents, you have the opportunity to audio record any eligibility or IEP meetings in the state of Virginia. And parents say to me, I don't really want to audio record the meeting because I'm afraid that might come across the wrong way, or the school team, might feel uncomfortable if I say that I want to record our conversation. But I encourage all parents to make it their standard practice to just record all eligibility in IEP meetings. I think it's asking a lot for parents to come to a meeting, participate in the meeting, be able to process all that's being said, as well as the decision making. So an audio recording really serves a couple of purposes. It allows you to share it with your, your spouse or your partner if they're not able to attend the meeting. It allows you to listen to it when you're maybe in a more calm state, so you can actually reflect on what the school team said to you and maybe hear what they're saying in a different way. And also, if for any reason you do need the audio recording as part of dispute resolution procedures, then you have it. So get in the practice of saying, I'd like to record the meeting, and then provide a way, bring the equipment for you to be able to do so. With regards to dispute resolution options, sometimes we all come to the table, and while we have the best of intentions and we're all there for the child and to talk about what they need and how we can support them, it does often end up in a discussion where we don't agree on everything. And there are points where we may agree to disagree. And in those cases, parents do have options to try to resolve any dispute that exists with their local school district. And the first, of course, is to reconvene the IEP team. Sometimes it's best just to take a break and to say, we need to get more data, we need to take a break, we're going to come back together and have this conversation again. But if that hasn't worked successfully for you with your IEP team, then you may need to consider additional dispute resolution options that are outlined in the procedural support document. And first is requesting mediation. Mediation is voluntary on the part of the parent and the school district, but it is an effective way to be heard and to have a mediated discussion over what is the issue, what are the possible solutions, can we reach some understanding on what this child requires and what we're willing to put into place. Filing a state complaint is also a procedural safeguard that exists for parents. If parents feel that decision-making has not been individualized or appropriate for their child, and they haven't been able to get resolution by inviting others to the conversation or having multiple school meetings, then they can file a state complaint with the Virginia Department of Education that will be investigated. And often, if it is required and deemed necessary, then corrective action can be required by the local school division. And in the most egregious of situations where there is not agreement and parents believe their child has been denied a free and appropriate public education, then parents have the right to file a due process claim. Now, this is not something to be taken lightly, and whenever I'm working with families, I always recommend that they consult with a special education attorney prior to initiating and filing a due process claim. When to get an advocate involved is also a question that I'm asked a lot. It is a new environment, and the regulations, while they have stayed the same, local school practices and procedures feel like they're changing from day to day. And so parents say to me, I've been pretty successful on my own. I have a good understanding of what my parent rights are, but sometimes I just feel like I can't help my child or things are not moving forward. And I acknowledge that sometimes that is the case. And parents can consider inviting advocates to the conversation if they think that will be helpful for them. And I've given a couple of examples of when you might want, as parents, to consider consulting with an advocate or seeing if they might be able to help you with these important school decisions. And for all of us who have students who learn differently, I do want to remind everyone that this is not a one phone call, one meeting type of a situation. If we have a student with a 504 plan or an IEP, the regulations require that at a minimum, we're going to be getting together with our school team at least once a year or more often if the parents request it, to talk about their unique needs, their goals, their progress, their accommodations, their assistive technology. And so while it does feel sometimes like, you know, it's a long road in advocating for your child, it truly is a marathon and not a sprint. And I think if we adopt that mindset and we know that we're gonna address these challenges, you know, one leg at a time and reach resolution and move on from there, then as parents and as school teams, we can work a lot more collaboratively together. The other thing I want to encourage parents at this especially challenging time is that it is not easy to advocate for our kids right now. As I said, there's a lot changing, there's a lot of emotion, our kids are frustrated, teachers are challenged to learn with the new technology, and sometimes it just feels like none of us are moving forward. But from these important school team discussions, real change is happening, and your child can actually receive the supports and services that they need, even in the middle of a pandemic. Because as we said, the right to a free and appropriate public education hasn't changed. So yes, will it be easy? No, but is it worth it? Absolutely. And I strongly encourage all parents to make that phone call, send that email, bring their school team together and talk about what might be possible for their student. I also want to encourage you, if you have questions as a result of this presentation, you can visit my webpage where I have resources available to parents as they try to advocate for their special education student. The Virginia Department of Education has a wealth of information and even an FAQ, a frequently asked questions section for COVID-19 to support parents. And also on our webpage, we have quick, easy links to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the regulations governing special education students in Virginia, assistive technology resources, and a host of other options for families who are looking for information for how to support their kids. So I hope you have found this presentation on advocacy action steps to be helpful. I hope that you feel more empowered to advocate for your dyslexic student or your student who learns differently. And I remain willing and available to help any parent if you have any question or would like to reach out to me to continue this important discussion. And also, I wish you the best as you enjoy the rest of your conference.